Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. D&D and other tabletop RPGs are great ways to just chill and spin a story in some good cooperative tabletop roleplay. Though sometimes you may run into that one player that sees everything as a competition and gets jealous when another player has the spotlight or gets something that they don't have. Much like the examples in these next two D&D horror stories. But first, I must ask if you do enjoy my videos, that you roll a credit on that like button, comment, and share the video, as it does go a long way to help the channel grow. And if you aren't already, subscribe and click the bell so you'll be notified every time I post a new video. With that out of the way, let's get right into these stories. Sam, the DM who wanted to force me into handing my character sheet to someone else, by Reddit user K. Rokon. This happened a couple of weeks ago. With several hobby stores reopening for smaller tournaments, I found a game which Sam admitted would last several sessions, as a new book, Wild Beyond the Witchlight, was coming out and he wanted to run something that was considered filler. I played a kobold character that I was really attached to. I really liked this character and found him to be enjoyable. This is because I developed a full backstory on him that I spent a while on. This was looking to be a fun time, and for the first few sessions I played, nothing went wrong. That was until Sam informed me that next week he was moving the game to his house and that another player would be joining, since the location was an hour more away. The hobby store itself was an hour to get to, so I didn't feel like driving the extra hour to play in game. This happens. Sometimes things can change and complicate a game. However, Sam wants my character sheet, the kobold, so that he can give it to another player. First off, I spent time developing this character, so I tell Sam that I wasn't going to give them up. He gets annoyed and also aggressive because of this, and it sparks a brief argument about how I was going to delay things for the newcomer. I'm thankful for the store employee who sticks up for me and tells him that he wasn't entitled to the kobold. Sam gives me a look like I was in the wrong and walks out of the store calmly. I don't think Sam realizes how people can be attached to characters they made, and that giving them up would mean passing the rights of their creation to that new player. The next week comes by, and one of Sam's players that I played with proceeds to tell me that I dodged a bullet. I need to be honest. This guy seemed petty over something that happened with him and Sam, so I don't fully believe what he told me. This is another thing, so take things if they seem off with a grain of salt. He told me that Sam was arguing with another player over a rules dispute, which ended in Sam having a meltdown. People started walking out, but Sam tried to prevent this by standing in front of the driveway so no one could drive off. They were being held there for a few hours, until they were able to convince Sam that they were going to call the authorities. From what I heard, the guy who told me this story had a record for being a problem as well. The return of Sam. Sam was fine after he moved back to playing in the store. He didn't DM as much, and if he did, he would play with other players. We didn't really talk much, and if we were sitting at the same table, we would also make peace with each other. The person who told me about Sam's meltdown eventually stopped showing up, and Sam never made any mention of him either. I thought past drama was finally over. I was wrong. One day, a brand new DM shows up. He is around the age of 15 to 16 and invites people to play in a one-shot that he created. Josh, the DM, also tells everyone that he's new to DMing. I also joined the table to help Josh, since he was also asking for feedback when the first session was over. We sit down and Sam also joins us. The one-shot dealt with a band of marauders, flying around on insects and stealing all the food from various farms. As adventurers, our job is to find the source of the infestation and put a stop to it. Josh sends out a horde of goblins riding giant wasps that imply that they're behind the attacks. The problem? There were too many for a level 1 party to deal with. I think Josh thought that we could handle this encounter, but not everyone has a bow they can shoot with, and the goblins could fly up to avoid melee. As you probably guessed, it was a TPK. Josh wasn't happy about this and apologized to everyone, and said that he felt horrible for how this encounter went. We all understood and offered advice to Josh, except for Sam, who was enraged. He tells Josh that he is a horrible DM. We explain that Josh is new, and that mistakes like this can happen when someone is learning. Sam makes it a mission to antagonize Josh, as he says he wouldn't make this kind of mistake as a new DM, and how he probably didn't read the stat block. I call Sam out on this and tell him that he's an asshole. Sam doubles down and continues to list Josh's flaws in a toxic manner, which turns into an argument at the table. Josh then grabs his things and leaves silently while Joe, another player, is so upset that he stands up and approaches Sam with the intent to harm him. We all tell Joe to sit down, saying that it wasn't worth it, but Joe wanted to beat the shit out of Sam. The owner quickly stops things from escalating any further. He tells Joe to sit back down, threatening to ban him permanently if he assaulted anyone and demanded an explanation. Afterwards, Sam is pulled to a corner of the store, and we can only assume that the owner is scolding him. Sam comes back to the table and grabs his things. He comes back next week, but is more quiet when he does so. Sadly, Josh never returned, so I couldn't give him any constructive criticism. If Sam does anything else like this, I'll be sure to give another update, but I'm hoping that this will be the last part. TLDR, Sam is fine for a while, but when an inexperienced DM shows up, he berates them for making mistakes until they leave the store. He gets scolded by everyone, including the store owner. December 13th, 2021. Minor update. I ran into Josh recently. Turns out we were both looking for Pokemon cards. He told me that he was going to try DMing again, and how the owner told him that Sam wouldn't be allowed to play at his tables anymore. I'm probably going to play to show support. Sam gets the boot. It's hard to believe that I'm already talking about Sam again. You would think that he would be smart to stay below the radar after what happened, but not even a month later, the nightmare was gone. I don't know if everyone saw the update from the last post, but I ran into Josh after the incident. He told me that he wasn't giving up on DMing, and that he only left because he didn't want to get involved in the argument. Josh also said that he would eventually return, as the owner called and told him that Sam wasn't allowed to participate in any more games that he ran. Josh was over the incident. He said it was water under the bridge, and that he had no hard feelings against Sam. While at game night, I finished D&D a bit early as our table had cleared this module, which was very simple. I go over to where Joe is and see that he's with Sam. I watch the game in action, making sure not to interrupt, while everyone chuckles at how the DM roleplayed this one bugbear NPC. Sam is also laughing, which I've never seen him do before. He wasn't taking the game seriously, and it was a great time so far. That all changes when the session ends and a magic item is at stake. For those who don't know, when Adventure League ends, any magic items that were found are up for grabs. To get a magic item, you have to roll a d20, no modifiers, against other players who won it. The one with the highest roll wins the item. The magic item from this session was a figurine that could transform into a giant owl, which also served as a flying mount. As you probably guessed, Sam lost that roll against 3 other players. Boss Goose hit the hammer on the nail. Sam is used to getting what he wants, due to being spoiled, and he isn't happy about losing something that he feels he's entitled to. He wanted that giant owl figurine and asked the winner for it, and he even offered to trade other things in exchange. The player told Sam that he didn't have anything he wanted, and Sam goes quiet. He gives the winner this glare as we all decide to talk. Sam is still sitting there the whole time, looking at the winner. When the DM finally wishes everyone a good day, Sam finds the chance to speak with the one who wronged him. Sam tells the winning player that he should watch out because he could be jumped on the way to his car. Everyone heard it, and 3 players get up from the seats and quickly inform the owner. Sam follows them and tries to defend himself, but the owner tells Sam to shut up and let the others speak, and the 3 players tell him about the threat that Sam made. Sam tries to get out of it by saying that he was only joking. He even empties his pockets and says he doesn't have a knife or gun, which meant that it was a joke, right? The owner isn't having any of it. The incident with Josh was Sam's final warning, as he had gotten into trouble before I even met him. He pulls a Christian Weston Chandler when he's told to never come back, by accusing the owner of hating disabled people. He also accuses everyone of targeting him constantly, which results in an argument between him and a man trying to run their business. During the argument, the owner mentions how he had been nice to Sam up to this point, but making threats against other customers is where the line is drawn. Sam tells the owner to follow him to prove that he didn't have any weapons in his vehicle, which wasn't the point of the discussion. Sam eventually walks out, but not before giving everyone a death stare, and also kicking the table that we were sitting at multiple times. Thank Bahamut that we packed our miniatures before this. The owl figurine person was also escorted, for safety, on that night, and that was that. Sam is hopefully no more. TLDR, Sam is used to getting what he wants. He gets angry at someone for winning a dice roll, and makes a threat against them for winning, and gets kicked from the store permanently. Sam certainly seems like the type of player that I would avoid at all cost. To demand OP's character sheet so he could keep the character, talk down to a new DM trying his best to make a game for people to have fun in, and then to threaten another player for winning an item roll, it sounds like he has a lot of growing up to do. Have you ever run into someone this entitled when playing tabletop RPGs? If so, I would love to hear about how you handled the situation. Though, let's move on to the next story. The Dishonorable Player by Reddit user Wilksta. Please bear with this one. I do have to set up the scene first, but this was an incident that shook me when it happened. I was so cross, and it soured my relationship with a player that I considered a friend. So, a while ago, about 5 years or so, I got back into RPGs after a long gap. I was lucky in that I linked up with some other players looking to build a Wild Marches server, and became a founding member. It was an eclectic group, but one guy, let's call him Mike, set himself up as a bit of a leader and font of 5e knowledge. 5e was still new to me, and there were others in the group who hadn't played it before, so we listened to him. Plus he sounded like a nice guy, and I got on well with him. Or so I thought. This is slightly irrelevant, but he was quite young. I was a lot older than the other players, and I was more experienced in RPGs than him, but not this version. I also play a lot of non-D&D games, but I never brought this up. Anyway, I started playing a new concept, a Hexblade, as I was a huge Elric fan, who was multi-classed into Bard. So I will admit that it was tricky for some people to guess his class. That's important for later. And Mike also built a Warlock, but this was a Fiend Fightlock. That is, his first level was Fighter, and the rest was Warlock. Now, as we were both Bladelocks, we had a lot in common. My character was linked to the patron in his blade through his backstory, and was built around love, whereas Mike's character was possessed by a literal demon. That's right, a demon was inside of him. This was an interesting concept, and he played it with so much gusto, as the trapped man locked in a battle for his soul. Sometimes, however, the demon would win, and that's when the problems will start. I will get to that. The other thing to mention is that Mike's character had a code, that was to always fight honorably. Now, at first glance, that sounds great, but his idea of being honorable was somewhat different to others. Basically, he always fought to the death. The idea was, to hold anything back in a fight is dishonoring the person you are fighting. It sounds like a good thing, but trust me, it turned problematic rather quickly. You also need to know that he was a huge power gamer and optimizer. He min-maxed his guy, and had to be the one that did everything. Have to kill something? He had to get the killing blow. Need a face? He's your man. Stealth mission? Yep. Just ignore the plate armor and awful decks. Min-max, remember? Someone will just cast Pass Without a Trace on me. That sort of thing. He also played a lot of games. He was off sick at the time of play and jumped on every game he could, putting him at a higher level to everyone else. He was easily the strongest character on the server. Now, after all that preamble, let's get to the actual event. We had been tasked with investigating a village that had gone silent. Very quickly, we ascertained that there was some sort of mind control going on, as the whole village was outside of the church, standing motionless staring at it. We crept up and discussed what to do, and Mike just walked straight over to one of the villagers and started talking to him. We were dumbfounded by this, but let him continue. The villager, however, didn't say anything to Mike. He was mind-controlled, remember? So Mike decided to hit him with his sword. Did I tell you that this was a magical poison-inducing greatsword? The DM suggested it be a non-lethal blow, to which he said, quote, "No, that would be dishonorable," and outright murdered the villager. If you haven't guessed by now, he was playing the whole "it's what my character would do" trope. Anyway, to speed this up somewhat, we had to get into the crypt of the church, which would have been easy as the villagers ignored us, up to the murder. But now, we had to fight our way through. The whole way we were knocking villagers out, but Mike simply cut a bloody swath through the town, murdering as he went. Eventually we got into the crypt, and to the source of the problem. I can't remember what it actually was, but I do remember the creature's defender, the town's champion in full plate, wielding a magical greatsword. Now, our tactic was to take out the mind controller, but Mike just waited into the night. Anyway, we managed to kill the creature, but not before Mike slaughtered the knight. This is where the real fun starts. As soon as the knight hits the floor, Mike grabbed up the obviously magic sword to claim. He chucked it at me as he knew I had Identify, due to bard stuff, and insisted I find out what it was before we went anywhere. Upstairs, the village was coming to life, but here I am, ritually casting a spell as I blew all my slots in the fight, to appease Mike. Anyway, it turned out it was only slightly magical, and disheartened, he handed it over to the other fighter in the group saying, quote, "You might as well have this then. My sword is more powerful." I have to point out, there had been zero discussion on loot at this point. He just assumed that it was his. That was his way. Because you guessed it, it's what my character would do. The fighter, however, turned it down, as he also had a magic sword that was better. Mike then chirped up a bit as he realized we could sell it, meaning more gold for him. Then I piped up, pointing out that I was a blade lock. Remember? My multi-class sometimes confused people. And I could use a greatsword. Plus, I didn't have any magic items at all. Begrudgingly, Mike handed over the sword, and I was very happy with my first item of the game. We were now at the end of the game, and the DM wanted to wrap up with the thankful villagers giving us some more loot. And then it happened. Mike steps forward to speak to the mayor. Let's not forget, he had killed about a dozen villagers, as well as the knight, but he never apologized for his actions. So this was strange. He said, quote, "The knight we fought, was he your champion?" "Yes, a good man, but we understand what you had to do," the mayor responded. "Did he have a family?" Mike asks. I'm not sure if the DM had that written down, and I'm sure he ad-libbed the next bit, but said he had a son, and produced a teary-eyed child. Mike then looked at the child, whose father he practically murdered. Yes, they were fighting, but he gave no quarter, remember, because of honor. And we waited, amazed that his character, for once, seemed to be remorseful for his actions. But no. He then turned towards my character and said, quote, "I think you should give this child his father's sword back." Everyone was stunned. This was the guy that killed the child's father, tried to claim it for himself, and was pissed that he gave it to me, but then pulls this from literally nowhere. Now, I would like to point out that I was shocked and incredibly pissed off in what he had done, but maintained character and agreed to give it back to him. However, the DM intervened and said no, it was loot and I could keep it. But Mike continued to argue that that was the honorable thing to do, and how my character was dishonest in taking the sword. The DM quickly wrapped up the game, but I never truly forgave Mike for that day. We did carry on playing, but his activities got worse and worse as we realized how toxic he actually was. Eventually, he rage quit over a minor affront, but then tried to sneak back in and sabotage. Luckily, he did go and order was restored. I later found out that he joined a private group formed by other players on the server, and managed to wreck that game as well with his antics before getting booted. It was so weird, as he sounded like a really nice and genuine person when we started out. The idea of leaving someone alive when fighting, being dishonorable, could be an interesting character trait, though the way Mike did it seemed anything but that. Killing off villagers that are being mind-controlled is something I would call dishonorable, and then for the party to get a magic item that OP could actually use, just for Mike to try to pull something like that, just because he was jealous that he couldn't use it, shows all of the signs of that guy behavior and main character syndrome. Then to rage quit over something and sneak back in to try and ruin the game for everyone else, that just shows real life asshole behavior. Have you ever experienced someone like this? If so, feel free to vent about it in the comments. If you have a story that you would like to be read on the channel, you can always post a link to it in the comments on the channel subreddit r/DnD Doge, or even just DM me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you, and hope all of your rolls are natural 20s. Until next time.